Can I request everyone to please get seated so we can begin the event? So, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. On behalf of Common Cause and CSDS, I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to the launch of the Status of Policing in India Report 2023, Surveillance and the Question of Privacy. We will begin the event with an introduction by CSDS and Common Cause. So this will be followed by the report release and a panel discussion. So without further ado, can I invite Professor Sanjay Kumar to give the welcome address, please?
Thank you, Radhika. On behalf of Center for the Study of Developing Societies and Common Cause, let me extend a very warm welcome to all of you. A very special welcome to Honorable Justice Chelameswar, who is our keynote speaker for today's event. Let me also extend a very warm welcome to our three esteemed panelists for a panel discussion which follows the release of the report. Mr. Prakash Singh, Professor Ruchi Sinha, and Mr. Apar Gupta. All three have agreed to participate in a panel discussion. We will have the release of the report, as Radhika has already mentioned. After that, we have a panel discussion, which will be moderated by Mrs. Anjali Bharadwaj. Let me also extend a very warm welcome to Anjali ji for having agreed to moderate the discussion. Let me give you a brief background about this study. This is a study of Lokniti, which is a program of CSDS in collaboration with Common Cause. This report on surveillance and question of privacy, as I said, is a jointly conducted study by CSDS and Common Cause. This is not the first study of its kind. You can already see the cover of the previous report. So this is not the first collaborative research on the issue on policing in India with Common Cause. This is the fourth study in the row which Lokniti CSDS has conducted on various aspects of policing in India. What is common about all these four studies for the last 4.5 years or 5 years we have spent looking at policing in India is that we have dealt with different aspects of policing in India, and that is why a broad title has been given, Status of Policing in India Report. And for this year's report, the latest report, which is going to be released shortly, has been titled as Status of Policing in India Report 2023, Surveillance and the Question of Privacy. What is another common thing about these four studies? I think all the four studies, the data, the primary data which has been collected for all the four studies is through surveys. But I must also let you know that survey is not the only tool through which information or the data has been collected for all the four rounds of studies. Particularly this round of study, there has also been focus group method used for data collection, and also some in-depth interviews has been conducted with people who have dealt with these issues. As I said, this is the fourth study in the row. So let me also give you a brief background of when did we started this collaboration. So our collaboration on this study on policing in India with Common Cause began in 2017. That was our first study. And what we did in our first study, we looked at how common citizens of India look at issues related to policing, especially about performance of police and people's expectations if they had ever dealt with the police or if they had to deal with the police. So that was the first study conducted in 2017. Again, as I said, this was a survey-based study. Common citizens of country were interviewed. Almost 12,000, 14,000 people spread across 22 states were interviewed. And based on that, we had the first report in 2017. The second study looked at police adequacy and working condition of the policemen. This study was also a nationwide study. Study was released in 2019. And in this, we interviewed the policemen, the serving policemen for this study. We also interviewed one of the family members of the policemen who were interviewed at their home. So a different kind of a study of its own kind. Of its kind. We were very skeptical whether we would be able to interview the policemen or not. But finally, I must tell you that there was a lot of enthusiasm among policemen in order to respond to the kind of questions we asked in that second study. The third study in the series was completed in 2021. And in this round, we focused on two aspects. One was policing in conflict-affected regions, and we picked up what we call the red corridor. So we did the study in almost, say, 30 districts of that country, looking at policing in conflict regions. And this was the time when COVID, when there was a lockdown because of COVID, and this study got prolonged. So what we did in this study, we also picked up another aspect, which was policing in difficult times. So we also picked up we also conducted the study, a special study looking at policing in difficult times, and we picked up COVID as a case study, and we did this study in a very large number of urban locations. So that was study number 3. As I mentioned earlier, this is the 4th study in the row. In this study also, we have done more than 10,000 interviews spread across a large number of cities. This is not a national survey of that kind. We did not go to the rural India because we thought that this is an issue on which people in the rural India may not have opinions. So this is largely a study of urban India, but we have gone to the big cities and even the small towns. There are many interesting findings which has come out of this study. Some of the findings you may agree to, some of the findings you may find uncomfortable, you may not, you may have quarrel with those findings. I think the details are there in the report. What we are going to do today is to have a short presentation on the findings of the report, which will give you a glimpse of what kind of questions we have asked in this study and what are the salient findings from this study. So now I would request our collaborator and from Common Cause, Vipul Mudigalji, to come and have a brief presentation of the study, and then we will have the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanjay ji, and thank you all of you for coming. As Sanjay ji explained, this is a round of things in which we are trying to create baseline documents about policing in India. Now, these are very, very rudimentary baseline documents about what do people think about policing and what do policemen think about policing. And as in the past few reports you will find, things like torture, do you support fake police encounters? And you find that an overwhelming number of people are saying, yes, yes, we support fake police encounters. Then you ask the question differently, and then you say that would you, in the case of a road accident, go and lynch the person who's driving the car if it is not you? And then, so the CSDS has a way of asking questions, and we have a very special advisory group in which we have Professor Suhas Palshikar, Professor Sandeep Shastri, Professor Sanjay Kumar, and myself. So we always try to find absolutely indirect ways of going about doing surveys, You ask a battery of questions, you ask, different questions and bring them to, say if you wanted to ask a question about cow slaughter and lynching, then you would probably start with a driver who causes an accident on the road, and what would you do with the driver if you caught the driver making a mistake or something like that. Then you ask a series of questions. Then you ask a second set of questions. Then you ask what happens if somebody who's suspected of cow slaughter. So you see, the problem is in today's surcharged atmosphere, if you come to the question straight, you are asked which side are you? So you have to, and if you are a investigator, your studies have to be absolutely rigorous in terms of methodology, and they, you can't ask questions which are leading questions. So in that sense, these studies are very special. Most of them are not, the surveys are not conducted by professional surveyors. These are mostly students of MA, MPhil in different universities of the country. They are supervised by professors of political science and sociology. These are surveys in which, before doing the survey, we conduct elaborate training sessions in which people do mock surveys of each other, and people, are told how not to go about it, and, things like that. So these surveys are very special, and in this report, as Sanjay ji said to you, that we have used 4 different types of methodologies. One, we knew that a large number of people don't understand. These are things which are happening right in front of us. What do we do with them? WhatsApp is exploding right now, or it has exploded in, say, last 4 or 5 years. So law is yet to catch up with changing technology, and technology is changing very fast. So what do you do? How do you capture things? So one of the ways is also to conduct focus group discussions in which you invite domain experts, both working policemen or police officers who have dealt with this kind of cases, with cybercrime, with surveillance, in good faith. What do they have to say? Let us believe that whatever is being done for public safety or for national security. From that, let us start. And then ask questions about, if drone is being used in a certain locality, is there a legality? Is there a system of... So the focus group discussion brought together some of the experts who just don't know about the domain alone, but they also have the experiential knowledge of dealing with these things. So in this, we had a set of police officers, we had a set of academics, both in India and abroad, who have worked on policing in the past. And then we had journalists who have been victims of Pegasus, or let us say alleged victims of Pegasus, and we who have been snooped on, etc., and some social scientists. So this group discussion, once again, the questions which were asked were like very straight, very few, but of course, from the constitutionality to the ethics and the legality of it, all of it was covered through. I'll not go through the questions. So can we just start the... Okay. So, yeah. So how do you do this?
You just click on this to go to the next slide.
Technology. Yeah, so as I said, the survey with common people was one. The other was official data analysis. Now the official data is also, you would see that in this particular subject, there is like serious dearth of official data. There is no data available on how many CCTVs are being installed in which area, even though the Chief Minister of Delhi is going around claiming credit for it and saying that, the largest number of CCTV cameras anywhere in the world, as if this is a badge of honor for him. And of course, the FGDs, as I explained to you, focus group discussion. And we also did a content analysis of the media coverage of these issues. Now, in the official data, as I said, for instance, in Delhi, there were about a few years ago, 4.36 lakh CCTV cameras. Now I think it's 5 lakhs plus. But the police has access to about 10,000 of these. They can perhaps have access, but so that much is the difference between how much of technology is being used by the police and by everybody else. And then in the official data, we find that there is no statistically significant relationship between the deployment of CCTV cameras and the rate of crimes, which means that in a certain area, if you had hundreds of cameras installed for several years and you study the crime graph, has it come down in any way? There is no such relationship found in that data. So I think worldwide also, it is being said, probably police have ease in solving crimes, but there is no relationship between these two. And then something which came out in the focus group discussion also, that the level of training and capacity of the people who are doing surveillance is like woefully inadequate. The charge sheeting rates in cyber crimes in which some of these technologies are used is very, very low. In Assam, for instance, which has the largest, which has among the best infrastructure for cybercrime, dealing with cybercrime, the conviction rate was only 2.2%. And then there's a new type of political motive cybercrime which is now coming up, which was, there were oddly about 30, 40 cases 4-5 years ago. And suddenly it jumped to 356 cases. And in the last 2-3 years, of which data is not yet available, it has gone up exponentially. So what are these political motive cyber crimes? Now, for now, we leave it to your imagination, but as we get more official data on this, we'll tell you more story. And again, the focus group discussions and interviews with serving police officers were very important. Now, most of them said that the targeted surveillance by the state is the cause of concern and not the individual surveillance. And one point that came out in the FGD, and there is no other way of saying it, that in India, some of the most professional and perhaps best intelligence agencies, arguably, do not have any oversight. They don't have parliamentary oversight or judicial oversight or public oversight, or to an extent no media oversight, which means that they are pretty much at the disposal of the political executive, and there is huge lack of accountability there. And then there was this thing which came out, that the inaccuracies and the prejudices of the mind of the people who are using surveillance technology also get translated into algorithms. And then, you know, the worst combination of the human prejudices and artificial intelligence, you know, what it does and what it can do is quite amazing. The media content analysis, once again, I mean, large number of, almost all stories, I may say, because the number that you see on top is 73%, but is actually much more because a lot of sources are not mentioned. So whenever media writes stories about surveillance, the primary source happens to be the government. And then in the stories about surveillance in which there is any mention of privacy or legality, that is down to about 14%. So you would see that except for one or two channels which are doing, or one or two news outlets which are doing consistently kind of anti-government reporting, like No Marks for Guessing, say The Wire, you would find a lot of stories about surveillance which talk about legality and privacy, etc. But others are not bothered. So you see Times of India and Dainik Jagran have a large number of pro-surveillance stories. Then in the surveys, we find it breaks your heart that you know, the one of the most important and landmark judgments in today's India, the privacy judgment, Puttaswamy judgment of the Supreme Court, which made privacy fundamental right of citizens, of which Justice Chelameswar, who's the keynote speaker of today, was a member of the bench. Only 16% people have heard about it. Now we have not asked them. You know, it's like you don't embarrass somebody कि भाई privacy के बारे में बताइए, उस judgment में क्या लिखा है. ये बोलना शुरू करोगे तो कोई नहीं बताएगा. We just asked, have you heard of the privacy judgment called Puttaswamy judgment? So only 60, which means about 84% people have not even heard about it. What it is it a bird, is it a plane? Nothing, you know. So, I mean, people who are, you know, better off, more educated, they had some idea. And then coming to CCTV cameras, about half the people said that yes, they have CCTV cameras installed in their areas. And the largest number of CCTV cameras have been installed by the individuals, by the citizens, not by the state. And you would see that this blue chart, the bigger one, personally installed and then installed by the RWA. RWA is also emerging as a very interesting power center in urban India. And you would see very often they turn people out from their colonies if you're going to, if you're a hawker or if you're not invited by somebody, you can't enter a colony. It's become like completely fenced, which has both sides. So one is not taking any positions on that. But at the same time, when you come to the slums and the localities of the poor people, you would find that they are less likely to put CCTV cameras in their houses, and the rich people are 3 times more likely to do the same. So, but the government is 3 times more likely to put cameras in the localities of the poor than in the middle class localities or the localities of the rich. Now, the risk of illegal mass surveillance, we asked people directly that, you see so many cameras in public places, after all, is there any risk of mass surveillance? Only about 25%, but thank God there were 25% people who said, yes, there is some risk of illegal mass surveillance. And once again, people believe, about 72% people believe that their CCTV camera helps in reducing crime. And we had earlier seen the official data statistics of 5 years that there is no significant statistical relationship between the two phenomena. Now, there's another judgment which is equally important as Puttaswamy judgment, which is Paramveer Singh judgment, in which all the police thanas in the country are mandated to install CCTV cameras inside, including in areas where people are locked up and in areas where people are interrogated, so that there is some amount of accountability of the police officers using CCTV cameras. So a large number of police stations still do not have CCTV cameras, and the word used in the judgment, as far as I remember, is the functioning CCTV cameras. Because in our country, it's very common that, yes, of course we have a CCTV camera. It's not been working for a few days, but that's okay. So functioning CCTV cameras, and then we filed a large number of RTI applications. We did get a large number of replies also, but they were like inadequate, etc. So they definitely help in reducing torture and abuse. A large number of people said so, and people believe that interrogations will be more humane if you have things like that. So there was a little bit of kind of suspicion, cynicism around this. About 40% people, 39% people are aware of incidents of CCTV footage tampering and manipulation by the police. So, that is also there, but you cannot not obey the judgment because it can be misused. Now, do you think political parties do surveillance of you as a potential voter? So, when we asked, this is again a battery of questions, several questions around this, asked in various ways, degrees of how much you strongly agree, strongly disagree, agree, disagree. So the political parties snoop on individuals for winning elections. About 60% people believe, yes, they do. What is the big deal? Jasusi karte hain to kare. Private companies and NGOs misuse data for elections. Private companies and NGOs, again, NGOs is quite important. We are an NGO and we do put NGOs also in that, in that circle. That do you think that NGOs also do these things? So they say that yes, they also spread fake news. And there are all kinds of NGOs. And the elected governments snooping on citizens, yes, what is the big deal? So when there were some incidents in Hyderabad of police just stopping people randomly, hundreds of them, and just taking their phones and saying collect it from the Thana later. So now they have your phone. Now, do they have a right to take my phone? Do they have a right to know about certain things, my activities, where have I been, who have I written to in the last 2 days? Or they want everything, from my bank account details to my friends list to everything. They've just taken it. So we asked these questions about should the police have the freedom to check telephones or mobile phones without a warrant. Good number of people said that, 38% people said that yes, they can, the police should always obtain a search warrant, and which means that about 60% people were not sure of this. Now, surveillance rights and freedoms, as I said in earlier reports, we found that a large number of people, a good number of people, had opposed fake encounters by the police, but a equally good number of people had also supported it. In the same way, 52% people, which is more than half, supported the use of CCTV cameras. 30% people supported the use of drones and facial recognition technology, about 25%. Now, there were questions about can they do this surveillance through drones to suppress protests and political movements. Now, people justified, a good number of people justified this also, but at the same time, the Adivasis and the Muslims and the farmers were less likely to support this kind of mass surveillance. Awareness about Pegasus software, as I said about Puttaswamy judgment, awareness, 67% people had not even heard about Pegasus. People think that they've been caught in the act, but about almost close to 70% people don't even know about what Pegasus is and who was targeted and how. So we also asked people about the fear of legal action for posting any political opinion or any opinion which can be seen as being political. So a large number of people said that they are actually scared and they are cautious about posting anything which is political on the internet. I don't know about forwarding messages. So surveillance by private entities is also something which a lot of people know about, and they know that their search history and everything is being frequently searched by these companies. Private companies is not an adequate representation of what they are. They are global internet giants, global internet platforms which trace every move we make. They even trace the moves that we don't make, which means they also know about our aspirations, where we want to be. So that is also a form of surveillance. So a large number of things you will find in this report, which is about private surveillance by these internet giants, and how at many places these internet giants have also been helping the governments. But there was one place where the common citizen was slightly uncomfortable about being surveilled, about all kinds of snooping and surveillance, and that was a leakage of personal data. That was about bank accounts. My bank transactions and my bank account details are something that should not be tracked by anybody. That is the only place where people were slightly anxious about. Otherwise, and then 72% people, as you see, were worried that their personal data such as Aadhaar number or PAN would be leaked online. Hacking and cybercrime, again, they were digital banking methods were like areas where people were most worried about hacking, etc. So the rest you will read in the report, and thank you very much. I think I've taken more time than was allotted to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Vipul. Let us now, we will be releasing the report, and I would like to call to the stage our panelists today, Justice Chelameswar, Ms. Anjali Bharadwaj, Professor Ruchi Sinha, Mr. Prakash Singh, and Apar. Would you please come to the stage? And Vipul and Sanjay ji also, if you can join us for the report release. Before we begin the panel discussion, let me take the privilege of introducing our guests today. Today's discussion will be moderated by Ms. Anjali Bharadwaj. Anjali ji is the founder of Satark Nagrik Sangathan and the co-convener of National Campaign for People's Right to Information. She has been one of the most vocal voices on issues related to transparency and accountability in India. Thank you for joining us, Anjali ji. We are also very pleased to have with us Mr. Prakash Singh. He's a retired IPS officer who has been the former DGP of UP and Assam and BSF. He was the primary petitioner in the landmark case of police reforms in India, also known as the Prakash Singh versus Union of India judgement. He's also the chairman of the Indian Police Foundation. Thank you for joining us today, sir. Our next panelist is Professor Ruchi Sinha, an associate professor at the Center for Criminology and Justice, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. She has worked extensively on issues related to policing, human rights, cyber crimes, and artificial intelligence. Thank you, ma'am, for coming today. We also have Mr. Apar Gupta, who is a co-founder and director of the Internet Freedom Foundation. He's also the co-founder of the Save the Internet campaign. He was elected as an Ashoka Fellow in 2019. Thank you for joining us, Apar. So today's discussion will be chaired by Justice Chelameswar. He is the former Supreme Court judge and former Chief Justice of Kerala and Assam High Courts. He was on the bench of judges who decided the landmark case of...
It's Guwahati High Court, not Assam High Court. It's a common High Court of Assam.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Guwahati. Yeah.
Objective.
Guwahati High Court, yes. He was on the bench of judges who decided the landmark Puttaswamy judgment that Vipul was referring to in his presentation, which was on the right to privacy in 2017. It declared the right to privacy as a fundamental right in India. He was also one of the judges who decided the Shreya Singhal versus Union of India judgment, which struck down Section 66A of the Information Technology Act. Another major judgment that he's been part of was the Aadhaar judgment, in which it was said that Aadhaar should not be mandatory for availing government subsidies and services. So thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. And let me now hand over to Anjali for moderating the discussion.
Thank you very much. As I understand, we are going to have a short discussion, a panel discussion for about an hour on the report and on the question today, which is before us, on how much surveillance do we want in our society. And following that, we are going to have the keynote address by Justice Chelameswar, who will also be responding to some of the issues that perhaps come up if he likes during the panel discussion. So I'll start by congratulating Lokniti and, of course, Common Cause on bringing out, CSTS Common Cause on bringing out this very important report. I think the report comes at a very significant time. It's a time where globally and in our country, there are growing concerns about the use of technology, artificial intelligence, large data sets being used for surveillance at a scale that has been in many ways unprecedented. At the same time, as was already mentioned, the Supreme Court has upheld the right to privacy to be a fundamental right in our democracy. So we are at a stage today where it's very important to consider some of the questions that have been thrown up by this report. As Vipul mentioned, there were nearly 10,000 people who were surveyed, who were spoken to during the course of this report and data being collected. And it's interesting to note that many, especially those who are perhaps more educated in terms of formal education, found that they felt that CCTVs and so on were less of a concern. But it was equally significant that a lot of people who live in poor settlements, those who are marginalized, whether they're Adivasis or they're people from minority communities, they have felt far more concerned about the state of surveillance, about CCTV cameras being deployed. And I think I have been part of some of the previous reports being released as well, where it was clear that there are concerns about institutional systemic bias in some of our law enforcement agencies and the police. So this, I think, is something which we will keep as a context when we have the discussion today. And as the report has shown, that unchecked targeted surveillance by the state is the biggest concern that was flagged in the report. And at a time where being Pegasused has become a term which all of us use and widely understand, I think that I'll just flag a couple of issues for the panel, which is a very esteemed panel, which will talk to us today, to reflect on and to give their thoughts on. I think one big issue which would be very useful to unpack is the accountability framework for surveillance. So when we are saying that some amount of surveillance might be necessary, we are saying that there is a Supreme Court judgment which says CCTV cameras have to be installed in police stations. And of course, the report has found that in many of the police stations, these were not even functioning. I think the framework for accountability in terms of surveillance is very important to go into. Who is the authorizing body? What is the authorizing mechanism? Who should be responsible for authorizing surveillance when it takes place? The oversight mechanism, including transparency. What is the scope for it? What is the need for it? Where are we today in terms of the oversight of surveillance when it is sanctioned? What is the complaint mechanism? Is there a grievance redress mechanism? Where do people go to? And what should be the system that should be in place? What should be the broad guidelines? We do need a set of guidelines which clearly spell out who should be allowed to carry out surveillance of what kind. What is the time frame in which this should be taken, this should happen? Is there need for a statutory framework which defines many of these things very clearly and which is very, very open and transparent for the people of this country? So I think with some of these issues being flagged, I'm going to request Mr. Prakash Singh to give his opening comments. I'm going to request all the speakers to speak for about 10 minutes in the first go. And then we'll take a few questions from the audience, and we'll again come back to the speakers for some clarifications and comments.
Justice Chelameswar, distinguished panelists, moderator, ladies, gentlemen, young boys and girls. We are talking today on a very sensitive subject, a subject which concerns our privacy, a subject which concerns our fundamental rights. But let us be very clear about certain things. Surveillance has always been an essential or even an integral part of a statecraft from the very beginning of history. Every king, every ruling party has employed the technique of surveillance. And historically, if you want me to go back, Chanakya's Arthashastra contains very detailed instructions on surveillance. And it talks of surveillance not only of people who are inimical to the state, it talks even of surveillance over the high officials of the government. I will just read out just 2-3 lines about what he says about the high officials. The king shall select from among the roving spies those who are diligent, can disguise themselves credibly, conforming to different regions, and who know various languages and professions, to spy on the activities of high officials within the country. They shall serve the king with devotion and to the best of their ability. So, every segment is to be kept under surveillance according to Kautilya. And then, of course, he goes about surveillance of people. And here he talks of spies in the guise of ascetics, spies in the guise of householders, spies as from amongst merchants, spies from amongst thieves. And then he talks of secret agents. He talks of watch over those who spend lavishly. He also talks of those who are visiting drinking houses and spending more than their means. So, it's a very comprehensive system of surveillance chalked out by Kautilya as far back as the Mauryan times. And it has, as I said, it is an integral part of any government, and you can't do, any ruling party or any government or any king cannot do without surveillance. Let us be clear about that. In India, once the Britishers established themselves, they also felt the need of surveillance. And in 1885, they formulated the Telegraph Act, which somehow, interestingly, is in vogue even today and is made use of by government. And apart from that Telegraph Act, we have the IT Act of 2000. These two are the main laws which govern and which regulate surveillance in India. The two famous instances when surveillance went berserk, one was the Neera Radia case, when conversations which that lady had with industrialists, with journalists, with businessmen, with politicians, all that was leaked out, and it caused huge embarrassment to a whole lot of people. The other one was the Pegasus case, to which Mr. Mudgal referred just now, in which about accounts in India only of about 300 people where their data was stolen without their consent. Now, surveillance does create problems, but these problems have become very aggravated in the present context for the simple reason that technology is galloping. It's not advancing, it's galloping. And technology has placed very intrusive, very formidable tools at the hands, in the hands of the government, with which just anybody can be put under surveillance without your knowing about it. And the challenge today is that not only is your privacy likely to be breached, the institutions, the democratic institutions can be threatened, can be subverted with the instruments that you have. So it's a very powerful threat, a very powerful instrument, and therefore a very powerful threat also. Now, in the absence of any recent law, the Supreme Court has been intervening from time to time to ensure that surveillance is kept within certain areas, within certain limits. And therefore, the first important case was this PUCL versus Government of India in 1996, in which the Supreme Court laid down certain procedural safeguards in matters of surveillance. The other important case about which you would hear from the learned judge present here, that was Puttaswamy case versus Union of India. Here, it was conceded that the right to privacy is a fundamental right, guaranteed under the Constitution. Now, that being so, the Supreme Court said that any order for restriction, any order for surveillance has to be reasonable and it has to be bona fide. Now, in India, there are at present 10 agencies which have been authorized to intercept, monitor your communication. There are 10 agencies, not one. And these are Intelligence Bureau, the CBI, the Enforcement Directorate, the Narcotic Control Bureau, and some others. These are the agencies which have the authority to put you under surveillance. But then the sanction must come from the Government of India, from the Home Secretary, from the Home Department. And at present, what is happening is that about 1 lakh monitoring or surveillance is sanctioned every year. Now, it's a huge number. It works out to about 250 per day. Now, if you are sanctioning 250 cases per day, that these can be, their communications can be monitored and intercepted, can there be application of mind? Judicious application of mind, I mean. It's just not possible. You would be just signing in routine. Yes, sanction. अरे भैया बाबू तुमने देख लिया है ना? हाँ हुजूर देख लिया है. और साहब ने दस्तखत मारा और चला. He has no time to see who is going to be put under surveillance and whether he deserves to be placed under surveillance. And this, Anjali, very rightly, as you said, the question of accountability. Who is going to be accountable if a wrong order is passed? There is no system of accountability. The officer concerned just gets away with it. There is no provision, there is no liability provision. The utmost that will happen if somebody goes petitions and it's found that yes, it was not a correct order, the order would be quashed and whatever has been monitored, the intercepted communication, those might be destroyed. That's about all. No accountability. Now, accountability is a problem, a huge problem. Any officer who sanctions monitoring, interception of communication has to take the responsibility for that order, that it was required under the circumstances, and that I have exercised my powers after due application of mind, which is not happening today. And therefore, there is a huge accountability gap, a point very rightly raised by the moderator. The problem that is happening, as I can say as a former law enforcement official, that in a whole lot of cases, surveillance is ordered for extraneous reasons, not because you are indulging in anti-national activities, not because you have links with some foreign agency, but because government wants to fix you probably. So you are put under surveillance. Now, these are cases which are objectionable. This amounts to abuse of certain powers, and abuse of power, I mean, that's common not only in India, it's common across the world. Once a certain power is given, using it judiciously and within the limits prescribed by law, that not everybody is able to adhere to that. Then, as I have already said, there is no accountability, and the existing procedural safeguards which have been laid down are inadequate. What is needed is a comprehensive legislation covering every aspect of surveillance, under what circumstances surveillance would be ordered, what will be the mechanism for it, who will be the sanctioning authority, for what duration. It's not that if you are put under surveillance, it can go on for a year after year, and people forget. It's like a billboard which somebody puts up at a place and then forgets, even if the function is over, the billboard is still there. So once a sanction order is given, you forget about it and it goes on and on. So, I mean, there are serious problems in surveillance today, and these need to be taken care of. I just want to make very brief comments about some of the findings. I mean, I find it very encouraging that there's a high level of public support for surveillance. There's support for CCTV, there's support for drones. Yes, not 100%, but there is a sizable support for drones, for the facial recognition system, for biometrics. But maybe, I would say not many people who are giving their consent to or conveying their approval for these tools of surveillance. Probably they're not fully aware of the criticalities, I mean the sensitivities involved, and the possibilities of misuse and abuse. They're not. They have given their consent in a general way because they find that there's a lot of lawless elements around here. There are a lot of communal elements here. There are subversive elements are there. Separatist elements are there. I mean, I think Indian society, that way is very complex. It's more. I mean, whatever comparative studies I have done, I find it more complex and more problematic than society in any other part of the world. As I have said more than once, you think of any problem in any part of the world, and I will show you a reflection of that in India. So we have such a plethora of problems. It's unimaginable. It's unimaginable for the common man. You travel from one part of the country, you travel from Kashmir, you have problem, separatist problem in Kashmir, Pakistan, Punjab, you're seeing the Khalistan problem. You come to central India, you have Mars problem. You go to northeast, you have insurgencies, multiple insurgencies by so many, by the Nagas, by the Manipuris, and so many other groups. So there are problems and problems, and it is in this context that people say that yes, government needs support, government needs surveillance, government needs monitoring, government needs interception, and in a general way. But as I said, the sensitivities of the exercise, the criticalities, and how it could be misused or abused, that is probably not many people are aware of it. One thing very encouraging, I don't know whether people mentioned it, that there's a huge degree of support for surveillance of MPs and MLAs also mentioned in your report, which I found very interesting, and I think it's absolutely called for when you have almost 43% people, if I'm not mistaken, that is the percentage given by the Association of Democratic Reforms of people who have questionable background in the parliament. So if people have supported their surveillance, I'm not surprised, and I think it's a good preference they have indicated. But as rightly pointed out by Vipul and also by the moderator, it is the unchecked, targeted surveillance which is a huge cause for concern, Another area which is also a huge cause for concern, but which has not been highlighted to that extent. You see, these social media giants, they have all the information about the Indian educated class today. Anybody using Facebook has spotted with a whole lot of information, almost complete information about himself. I was shocked when I get a Facebook entry that we can prepare your album for these years. I said, okay, let me have it. And I found he had a complete album of my activities for 2 years. I said, what the hell? I just switched off Facebook. I said, I refuse to be part of such a social media where he's almost tracking me, and he has got my album year by year more organized than I have. Of course, there was another reason for quitting Facebook. I mean, I found that they were promoting soft porn very discreetly, very quietly, and I wrote a nasty post and then quit the Facebook. But the social media giants have all the information about the Indian educated class today. That is the point. What do you do with it? And we have willingly parted with it. Every time you find a long page that these are the terms and conditions. Oh, ये भी कौन पढ़ेगा यार, इसमें दस्तखत मारो, click करो, आगे बढ़ो, click करो, आगे बढ़ो. But that is the temptation. And all the information about you is there with the social media giants based in USA. I don't know how can you get it back? You can't. So that is another huge area of concern, but I think it has not been highlighted that much in the report. So I would say that surveillance is a useful tool. For any state, it's a useful tool, but then it has to be used discreetly, it has to be used judiciously, and there has to be an accountability mechanism for it. And all that could be achieved if we have a proper regulatory authority. Now, the Government of India has been working on it, and there is a data protection bill which is still to be finalized. I think it has gone to the Joint Parliamentary Committee, and it is still yet to be passed by the Parliament. But a proper data protection bill. But that bill also, once it is finalized, is it weighted in favor of the government? Does it take care of individuals' privacy concerns and takes care of all the areas which could create problems for an individual? That still remains to be seen. But I would conclude by saying that we need to strike a balance between privacy and the need for secrecy, need for security. Between security and privacy, we need to strike a balance. It won't be easy, but if you can strike a balance, surveillance would be a useful tool for the government. But if we don't strike a balance, and if we give overarching authority to the state, then we are heading for trouble. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prakash Singh, and I think some very important issues flagged here. You talked about the problems of breach of privacy, and of course also how institutions can be subverted. And I think that this is a very important thing for us to think about, to talk about in a democracy, and where sanctions essentially come from the Home Department. So when we say that 250 cases of sanctions for surveillance are coming every day, and there is really a lack of a proper system of accountability for those who are providing those sanctions, I think that it does paint a very, very concerning picture, which I think is also brought out by this report. And when we say that in many cases the government is known to do this to fix people, then it also speaks to the finding in this report, where a lot of people from minority communities, from the marginalized sections, from those who are being seen as being targeted, are the ones who are most uncomfortable about surveillance and CCTVs being installed and so on. And I think the need for a comprehensive legislation for governing surveillance in the country is extremely important. And when we talk about surveillance and that being a useful tool for the government, I think there is need to also recognize that it's very important in a democracy for people to have trust and for public trust to be there in law enforcement agencies. So when under trials say that they're worried about being transported from one place to another, and a chief minister casually jokes and says that, you know, vehicles overturn sometimes, accidents happen. I think in that context also we need to understand that what are the checks and balances we need on a powerful tool like a sanction for surveillance to be there. And so I'm now going to request Professor Ruchi Sinha in this context and background to speak to us where the government is collecting such large amounts of data on citizens, whether it is Aadhaar, as has been discussed in the report, deploying technology at mass scale, which therefore makes mass surveillance possible. I invite you to give your comments.
I would like to thank my co-panelists, and I'll keep away from the topics based upon the expertise that I have on the dais. And before I begin with putting my points across, it would be interesting to know that the context has been set that we all are okay with staying in physically gated places. Our societies are all physically gated. But yet, we don't have a problem to be digitally exposed. And this dichotomy is the underlying problem with surveillance and privacy. I want my privacy physically, but I don't mind being surveillanced if it is based upon a digital community. Now, this context is the problem which has actually polarized all of us. Should we have it? Should we have it? Is it good? Is it bad? Now, these questions are basically so typical of what I call a stochastic experience. That is, it comes up, Snowden happened, everybody was absolutely shaken. Oh my God, this can happen. But then when Pegasus happened, nobody was shocked. They're like, hota hai. Now, the way we have reduced the kind of reaction we should have to this privacy being removed has slowly been blunted by technology. And that is where the problem is, and that is what we need to understand. And I think that comes from the fact that our understanding about surveillance and privacy is very, very different. When we talk about it, we tend to talk about it in homogeneous terms. We assume that the other is talking about or thinking about it in the same context, but it's not. It's different. And it is these layers of difference between surveillance and privacy that again gives the leeway to the power holder, whether it's the state or whether it's the corporation, to be able to permeate our lives. And that is why we need to address that as well. And interestingly, when you talk about surveillance, the best surveillance tool that Delhi police has used is neighborhood watch scheme before CCTV cameras came. Now that was something that everybody was very happy about, without realizing that they're saying, hey there, you can put anyone under surveillance. So the neighborhood auntie, the neighborhood uncle, the children, everybody was supposed to be saying, kuch kya sahi hai aur kya galat hai. Now that kind of surveillance is acceptable, but CCTV camera surveillance is not acceptable. Now, when did CCTV camera become very important? Because everybody is now on their gadgets. So you don't know who's traveling with you in the train, in the metro, or who's walking next to you. In fact, many a times people don't even remember what is the bag they were carrying. They themselves don't know that. Okay? Now, when you have blunted your understanding, your awareness to this level, you have given the right to CCTV camera to enter your life. Now, it is this logical permeance of technology in our lives that has given, apparently, the rationale to have this surveillance in place. Okay, and the best way to understand this is there's one person known as Jeremy Bentham who is said to have made prison very, very humane. Now, he actually didn't make it very humane. What he did was that he said that what is the best way to have surveillance in the prison is to have the panopticon. Now, that panopticon is what this technology is all about, okay? It's basically saying that I can see you, you can't see me. And it is this invisibility that has made people absolutely immune to the idea of surveillance. And this invisibility is what most activists, most advocates of privacy and against surveillance keep trying to highlight, but people keep saying, oh, how do I live my life? Because every time you download an app, what does it ask? Give access to your phone booth, give them the right to make calls, etc., to read the SMS. And you're saying, okay, kar dete. But once you've done that, do you imagine what all you've given away? But that is Google, that is Apple, so I don't have a problem. But when the police wala is taking it away from me, I have a problem. Now, this difference is then used by the state to say, usse problem nahi hai, to isse kyun problem hai. Now, this is physical and that is metaphysical, apparently. So now this is another context that we need to think about. And largely, this power that is being circulated around is known as the disciplinary power that Foucault talked about. Now, Foucault talked about three powers. Absolutist, he talked about absolutist power, which was by the monarchy, the judicial power, which Justice Chelameswar will be talking about, and I'm going to be talking about the disciplinary power. Now, it is that disciplinary power that technology is using. So if Zomato is now telling you which food to order and when Chroma is going to tell you that, hey, hey, it's time to replace your AC, or if XYZ is saying, now it's time to do this, that's surveillance. That is surveillance of your most private desires that we are letting be, but we don't react. Now, if you're not reacting to it, I think that's a huge, huge problem. Okay, so this invisible gaze of digital hits is something that needs to be now regulated. And that is where accountability comes in, okay? And that accountability will not come from the powers up there, the corporations, it will come from us. And how will it come from us? Stop downloading apps. Stop making your life so easy. Start working hard. Because the lesser gadgets you have and the lesser you have to use your mental faculties, the more will be the surveillance in our lives, okay? So, now, surveillance is normally seen as being top-down. It is done by a power. But many a time, surveillance is also bottoms-up. You know, there are people below you who are keeping tabs on you. So, I remember one constable telling me, Madam, आप जब देखो हमारी तरफ उंगली point करते हो, आपने कभी अमीर वालों के ड्राइवर से बात की है? So I was like, why should I talk to them? And they're like, वो बता देंगे आपको. बहुत सारा किस्सा. So I'm like, okay. So then that bottoms-up surveillance that exists, that is also a minefield of information. But we completely negate it because it's bottoms-up. Because surveillance from the power holder is credible, but surveillance from the bottom is not so credible. But what we are victims of is horizontal surveillance. And that horizontality, which is cutting across all of us, is technology. So that's another reason to understand that surveillance is not homogeneous. So I would basically try to bring about the understanding that contemporary surveillance is asymmetrical, and it's a place where you are seen, but I do not see who's seeing me. And the data capture that I'm giving to them is giving permission for the corporations to use with the power holder that in 1981, sorry, not 1981, technology was not so strong, so I would say in 2001, this is where she was, and today in 2023, this is what she's doing, and there is a data footprint that showed that she was about to do this. Now, this data footprint, as has already been pointed out, is the bias of the person who has done the coding. Now, where is there any guideline that people who are doing the coding do have human rights training, do have social sensitivity training, that they are diversity congruent? Do we know about that? No. So we probably need to get down to all those data centers. We need to get down to all the computer scientist education places and say that you need to start doing that. If we don't do that, it's just reaction to action that has taken place, but there will be no solution to what we are doing. And if you don't have a problem with data misuse by the corporations, the state will definitely turn around and say, why do you have a problem with me if I'm doing it in the name of security? Now, security is the biggest consumable that everyone will take over. And whatever surveillance is happening in the name of security. Now, which security are we talking about? My personal security or national security? You are not clarifying that. And if you're not clarifying that, and if crime rates are escalating despite your CCTV cameras, with security? And why should I agree or understand that your surveillance is further safeguarding me? So it gives me a tool as a citizen to ask whoever is doing the surveillance that give me the guarantee. Do we ask for guarantees? We don't. So we are laid back and we need to now stand up for our rights, okay? And finally, I would say that Google's Brillo, Apple's HomeKit, smart watches. So if you are raring to be the in-person, you're also raring to give permission to someone to do your surveillance. So now you decide what you want to be, the in-person, the cool person, or the safe person. Okay, and finally, I would say it's frightening that everything is being controlled, and this control is pervasive, it's imposing, and unfortunately, we are only stuck with the absolutist power that is against the state, but not against the others. We need to put checks for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sinha, and I think you've really reminded us that there is surveillance happening at so many levels. And when you talk about us being victims of horizontal surveillance by technology, I don't think anybody here misses the point that, you know, how technology today and firms, big firms, whether it is Google, whether it is Facebook, how today data is the new oil. And we need, as citizens, as people, to hold some of these private entities accountable, because there is so much possibility of surveillance. I mean, we've all heard about Cambridge Analytica, we've heard about use of data in so many ways to subvert democracies, to subvert our rights as well. And I think that the point that you've made is very well taken, that when it comes to some of the surveillance by the state, whether it is CCTV camera installation or other kinds of surveillance, we are far more proactive. But when it comes to giving consent on a lot of platforms, we are far more giving and a little less thoughtful in many ways, whereas that is equally concerning. But I think that, again, in the report that has been released today, one thing that was very clear is how people are concerned about collection of data and surveillance by private entities as well. So I think that that's a point very, very well taken, and it dovetails into the next, what I hope to hear from the next speaker. We have Apar Gupta, who has been at the forefront of talking about surveillance and about the right to privacy. And I'm also going to request Apar, apart from his comments on some of the things that have already been flagged, to talk to us about the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, which has now been proposed by the government. I think one of the issues which was really hoped would be addressed by this bill was the issue of surveillance, of how our digital personal data will be protected, how citizens would be protected from surveillance. And does this bill actually do that, and to what extent? So, Apar, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here. Common Cause for authoring and doing this report. It's really important. I think such long-term research, even when it does show findings that a large number of Indians may not be predisposed towards certain forms of privacy protections or may support surveillance, is incredibly important. I think it literacy which needs to be done, because people, I believe, are not a product of some biological creation solely in terms of their social attitudes, but nurture as per the environment which is around them. I'd also like to thank CSDS Lokniti for providing the methodology behind it. I really follow your work very closely around all the election-based surveys which are done. It imparts a great degree of objectivity to my own political biases. And of course, Lal Family Foundation for supporting this. This is critical work which requires to be done. It fills in gaps which are not exposed either by technology or by policy and legal analysis. This is work which needs to be done multi-year. Now, one thing I'd like to point out, just picking up from where the last speaker left off, was that we need to understand surveillance as a relationship of power, which also explains the survey findings as they have come about. For instance, they do show that even today, and this I think so was also there in the India Justice report, that there's a very low deployment despite clear court directions for the installation of CCTVs in police stations by itself. 1/3, I think so. Delhi police doesn't have audio recording. Why is that? Because it will place a system or provide information of accountability to the police forces by itself. I think this also is a realization which comes from the repeated non-compliances with the creation of police accountability committees, which comes from Prakash Singh sir's case itself. Now, this, when you understand surveillance as a system of power, we can also understand some of the other findings which come through the survey. For instance, it does show that people who are lower on the socio-economic rung seem to instinctively not like surveillance. This is not born out of suspicion, it is born out of their actual experience. For instance, if you look at a report which was released about 2 years ago by the Criminal Justice Accountability Project, on the basis of surveys and interviews they did with tribal communities in Madhya Pradesh, they call the deployment of new technologies in violation of safeguards under criminal law and police practices, which are fairly carceral in nature, as settled habits, new tricks, where technology is a veneer for institutionalized system of deprivation of lights itself. So it does not matter if it is AI, it's big data or facial recognition, it is the same police system by itself, which at its underlying basis may require reform. And I think our belief in technology today needs to be a little much more critical. We ourselves are seeing news stories and the media ecology flooded with statements about the potential about artificial intelligence. And this fits within what is called sometimes as the Gartner's hype cycle, in which we expect technology to first be magic, be a panacea for all our social problems, but ultimately it turns out to be a misdiagnosis or weak medicine. Here I'd like to say that our institutionalized attitudes towards technology in policing have been there for a long period of time. And why have they come about? They have come about because there have been genuine problems in terms of resource allocation in our criminal justice system. Let us take the Justice Malimat Committee report on criminal justice reforms in 2003. There's a conspicuous section within it with respect to the use of technology to help crime to solve crimes, because the number of police officials per person is low, but also develop and share intelligence tools and databases. We must remember this is in 2003, when internet penetration may be 0.01% and computer desktop ownership would be 0.03%. And its concluding recommendations included society changes, so does its values, crimes are increasing, especially with changes in technology. And a few years later, the Madhav Menon's Committee on Draft National Policy on Criminal Justice had a complete chapter itself on electronic surveillance and use of scientific evidence. I'm not dealing with scientific evidence, but there's substantial writing which is coming out that sometimes pseudoscience by itself may give the presumption of possibly evidentiary disclosure, which may not be completely solving the crime, but confirming an investigator's bias. And I would urge people to read Ginny Loknatta's book called The Truth Machines here. So what am I trying to say in the first part is that the faith we are placing in technology sometimes may not actually be met with evidence. And let me substantiate it with a much more recent example. There was lawlessness that occurred in northeast Delhi, and Delhi, as Vipul has just told us, has a very high density of CCTV cameras. Our Chief Minister boasts it leads even other cities such as Tokyo, Paris, London, whatever. And it also has a highest tele-density all over this country. In fact, there are about 2.4 to 2.7 active internet connections per person. And between February 23 and 26, 2020, there was violence which resulted in 53 deaths, 581 injuries, and resulted in 754 FIRs and 1,369 arrests. This is RTI data. The Union Home Minister, in response to this violence on the floor of the House, against this is as per parliamentary record, stated on March 11, 2020, through face identification software, it starts the process of recognizing all the faces. This software does not recognize religion and attire. We have put voter ID card, driving licenses, and government data inside this software. Through it, more than 1,100 people have been arrested, out of which 300 are from Uttar Pradesh. Again, there is a form of technology determinism. Secondly, it leads to real consequences for people in terms of denial of their liberty. This statement is substantiated by the Delhi Police's annual report in 2020. Interestingly, you can't find it on their website any longer. And also has about 4 pages which go on to state how the violence in Northeast Delhi was solved to a large extent with the use of CCTV footage, with data tools, with the use of the Vahan database, etc., etc., etc. Now, what is the result of all this evidence which has been gathered? And all the cases which have been filed under the IPC and the UAPA? Technology is supposed to solve crimes. Technology is supposed to make these evidentiary processes better. Of course, there is a video of a person, but that video is of a person at a place without indulging in violence. Sometimes that video is of a person who's wearing a specific color of shirt or a jacket, and they have arrested another person. And this is not me. This is as per analysis which has been conducted by Millennium Post, which reviewed about 100 bail orders out of a total of 3,500 bails granted so far. And the police had cited CCTV and video footage in at least 44 cases to back the allegations against the accused, out of which in 32, the video footage did not stand up to basic judicial scrutiny and the accused were granted bail. Another article, if you do not like Millennium Post, is in Article 14, which states, in a series of recent cases, various Delhi courts, these are district courts, have granted bail while holding the police responsible for vague evidence and general allegations, a shoddy probe, absolutely evasive, these are quotes from orders, vague, lackadaisical, callous, casual, farcical, poor. These are judicial orders. Now, finally, I'd like to come to why do I also think this is happening? And I think this does not happen only because we have structurally and institutionally accepted that technology is how we will solve our policing problem, and surveillance is the way out of it. I believe there is a very important role being played by the private sector here. This is illustrated in Manisha Sethi's book, Kafka Land, where she details at the Homeland Security Fair, this is in 2008, contemporaneously with the Mumbai terror attacks, where there were CCTV vendors interacting with police departments, offering modern technologies. These are budgetary processes of allocation, which deprive police forces of more manpower, the rest and the facilities that they need to conduct more humane policing by itself. It is my firm belief money is being diverted towards technologies which do not serve public purpose and in fact take this money away from police itself towards their own benefit of being a better police force. And I'll end by stating a Fickey and Ernst & Young report for the Foundation of Smart and Safe Cities, which is claimed by cities in Punjab. And I'm not drawing reference to a recent instance because Punjab claims that its smart cities and all these other cities have the capacity of real-time monitoring. This is a report which was authored by, in fact, Rajiv Chandrasekhar when he was the Fickey chairperson. And it states, quotes, totalizing surveillance technology, including centralized data system, GIS, which means geographic-based analysis and reporting, and ubiquitous CCTV cameras are the way to prevent law enforcement and national security issues. With this, I'll end my prepared remarks and respond to certain comments which have been made earlier by panelists. I say this with a very high degree of respect as much as there is substantial agreement and some difference as well. The first is, I never thought as a lawyer I would be in the position of being a petitioner in a court for a public cause. But I am, because I filed a RTI about 4 years ago asking for statistical information. Only statistical information, numbers, of the number of requests which are made, then granted, then reviewed of telephone-based interception in this country. There has been no data. It has been denied. It was first denied on grounds of national security. Thereafter, it was revised and claimed that this data has been destroyed. We do not even maintain it. This matter is pending determination before the High Court of Delhi. Hence, we do not even have data. That is the level of opacity of the number of surveillance orders issued in this country today. Hence, we do not even know today if the Home Secretary any longer applies their mind or even has the physical capacity to affix their own signature on them. The second is, there is a large amount of pending legal proposals which are in motion with respect to how our data is captured and how the governance frameworks are being set. However, they again represent the same view of a post-colonial state which is still aspiring to be a democracy but is not confident to give rights to ordinary Indians. The Digital Data Protection Bill is limited to data protection, which means consensual sharing of data. I agree, I have knowledge, I have noticed, but even there has large exemptions. This is a structural choice adopted from the time of the Sri Krishna Committee, where surveillance was kept out. Hence, there is no regulation of surveillance within the Digital Data Protection Bill. It is not a comprehensive privacy bill. Secondly, the Telegraph Act, which is being proposed to be amended and as per a ministerial statement will be introduced in the monsoon session of Parliament, is calling it the Telecommunications Bill. But if you look at the sections of surveillance, which is only a direct copy of Section 5.2 of the older Telegraph Act. In fact, it contains a provision which is titled as exclusive privilege of the central government. I will end here by stating that exclusive privilege is a phrase used by monarchs and colonies. It is not used in a democratic country. The power with the central government may be the power to license and regulate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Apar. A whole range of issues you flagged. And I think from alerting us that faith in technology could be misplaced with substantiating it with examples that all of us have sort of engaged with. I think what you talked about in terms of the need for transparency, even if it is just sheer numbers. So when your RTI application asking for the number of orders, surveillance orders issued or the interceptions done by the government and that being denied, and then being told that that data has been destroyed, I think that that should raise alarm bells for all of us. In terms of accountability of those who are supposed to sanction surveillance, and also for us as citizens in a democracy. How are we being surveilled? What are the systems? And of course, when you talk to us about the data protection bill, which I think a lot of people felt would address the issue of surveillance squarely, and the Telegraph Act as well. And of course, I think it should cause all of us some alarm that the exclusive privilege is of the central government, which is what is being stated now in the Telegraph Act amendment. So with all of these remarks from the panel, before we go to the keynote address by Justice Chelameswar, I'm going to open the floor for a few questions if you'd like to, if anyone would like to ask a couple of questions, and then we will request the panelists to respond before we finally request Justice Chelameswar. Yes, please introduce yourself, and if there is someone that you would like them to, specifically answer.
From Delhi, regarding Mr. Apar Gupta, what he said that transparency and all these technical things. I live in Raigada in Koraput, Odisha for 10 years.
Use the mic,
In
gentlemen.
2000,
Use the mic.
sorry, in 2000, when the telephone bill used to come, the bill with 3 to 4 pages with every detail, it used to come. So I don't think there is lack of any transparency or any transparency is there. This is my personal experience. I don't want to comment upon it. This is a platform to express one's views, not to argue with it anymore. Okay? Thank you.
Not sure there was a question contained. Good. Yeah. If anyone has a question here, yeah. Paranjoy. Questions and then.
I have a question which is at one level personal in nature, but it's also a matter of public interest. I would like Mr. Prakash Singh, if he can give me some advice. I'm soliciting his advice. Approximately almost 2 years ago, I was told that my phone, this one, had been allegedly compromised by Pegasus. Today I learned from the Financial Times that there's a new software called Predator, which the government of India is allegedly contemplating buying. So what does me as a citizen of this country do when the Solicitor General of India tells the Chief Justice of India that I will neither confirm nor deny a question that you ask him? Because the Chief Justice, the then Chief Justice, Mr. Ramana, he said, please tell us whether a government agency has bought it or not. He neither says yes nor no. And then we learn from the same Chief Justice before he debates office that the government did not cooperate with a committee that was set up by the Supreme Court. So what does me as an ordinary citizen do under the circumstances?
Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, the gentleman next to Paranjoy, and then we'll come to you. Yeah.
Thank you for very provocative, very interesting discussion. My name is P.K. Vijayan. I teach English at Hindu College. I had a couple of comments and really not really questions. It struck me that the point that we need to focus on is in some senses even prior to surveillance, and that's actually the perception that the state has of the citizen as an insurgent citizen. And that's where everything begins, that the citizen is not to be trusted, but the citizen is expected to trust the state implicitly. So the entire surveillance mechanism, the motive to put in place a surveillance mechanism begins from that premise, that there is something to be monitored with this deviant or potentially deviant subject. I think that's an issue that needs to be attended when we look at questions of surveillance. The second thing that I wanted to touch upon briefly is what Mr. Apar Gupta had mentioned in the example of the CCTV cameras being brought in and then dismissed in court as being vague. It seems to me that technology is being used more as a kind of fig leaf, that we have this and therefore we are entitled to arrest. So the intention to arrest is already there, and the motive and the prejudice that drives that arresting procedure is already there even before the CCTV and the record that comes from the CCTV. So I'd like to just place that on the floor.
Thank you. There was a question there, and okay, then two questions here, and then we'll stop. So.
Hi, thanks. My name is Prateek. I'm an MA student. I study history, and thanks a lot for the discussion. And my question is a more general one because I think everyone kind of touched upon aspects of it. One was that, of course, these kind of casual attitudes towards surveillance of this attitude of, hota hai, that's also very much replicated in how I think many people normally feel about common police practices of, like someone mentioned of, checking the phones, or for example, taking bribes, or just common forms of police brutality might be a strong word, but everyday forms of kind of police violence perhaps. And I think someone also mentioned that perhaps it's kind of the police system which needs more sort of fundamental reform there as a way to tackle also questions about rethinking surveillance. And I would just like to kind of pose that question about how do we answer this perhaps larger question of why do people seem to be so casual and rather, nonchalant about what the police does, and there seems to be a general tolerance for abuses of the police, and what might explain that?
Thanks. Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. My question is from Professor Ruchi Sinha. So I have actually 4 questions, ma'am. I'm sorry, I haven't formulated that much. So my first question is that during that Amrit Kal budget 2023, when Nirmala Sitharaman, she has said that India being the technology-driven and knowledge-driven economy. So ma'am, when the Elon Musk project of Starlink, which is going to be broadcast and launched in December 2023, and what you are expecting and seeing the scenario about the surveillance. Okay. My second question is about, you told us that one need to stop relying and uninstalling the apps. So being a research scholar coming from Center for Dalit and Minority Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia. So how can we do that? Because everything is being available on the internet. And my third question is that you talked about Foucault, he talked about the disciplinary society. So ma'am, it's just a comment, technology is being governed as a liberation for the humankind. Okay, it's not the problem with the internet, that's how we are actually using that, how we are encoding that performance, that particularly depending on us. So it's not the problem with the internet, rather how we are doing that. And my last question is that India with the second largest user of internet, approximately 4 billion after China. So ma'am, it's become a huge market basically. So and also the various cyber feminists are complying that it has become a female space who force the positive to productive relationship with the machine. So ma'am, how you comment on that perspective? Thank you so much, ma'am.
Last question here. I'm afraid we don't have time for...
Just a small question. It is also to Ruchi ma'am. While talking on dichotomy between big tech and state, while we can always pressurize state through protest and political movement, how do you regulate big tech? Does not transnational nature put a challenge to it? So that dichotomy actually is not a dichotomy in itself because of so many states involved in it. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question here, please, if you can pass on the mic.
Hello, my name is Arun. So we did, my question is to Mr. Apar Gupta and Prakash Singh. So you have mentioned about state surveillance being pervasive and its unchecked power which they have on intercepting phones and all. So what is the solution? Everybody wants to know what is the solution. Is it legal? Is it technological? Or is it the people movement to claim their right? So if the solution is about the judicial oversight when we are talking about interception, what is the nature of judicial oversight which works best in any other country and we are thinking to adopt it?
Thank you so much. I'm going to now request the panelists to please respond. If everyone could take about 2 to 3 minutes. I think they're very rich set of questions here, and I realize that it's a challenge to answer them briefly, but Apar, can we start with you and we'll go this way.
First, like to thank the person from Odisha who stated that there's transparency as per his own opinion in surveillance practices. I really do think that opinions which differ from mine need platforms and help enrich the discussions. I mean this sincerely, and I think more should be invited in this conversation. It helps strengthen the legitimacy of whatever we do say and what we learn together. Secondly, with respect to the question that are these structural problems which are there with policing and what is the role which technology is playing, I think what I didn't build upon a little bit more was that technology, the way I view it, is that it's not changing in terms of changing value systems and institutions. It's sometimes even deepening the existing ones which are there. And the private sector here plays not only the role of a contractor, but also it joins with the public sector in gathering more data. because it's gathering more power over individuals. And this is very important to understand from what we are learning about how increased amount of data capture by the private sector actually is sometimes sold to governments for money, purely for money. In fact, in the telecom bill pre-consultation, India's top telecom providers have asked the Department of Telecom to pay it to conduct surveillance. Yes, and this has also been reported. It's there. It's as per RTI. It's an official thing. So this is a very direct financial incentive, but financial incentives in terms of gathering more data on individuals, ordinary Indians, is there both from the private and the public sector. And which brings me to the final response in terms of what are the solutions in this. I think this is a broad problem. This is an economic problem, this is a social problem, this is a legal problem, this is an institutional problem. And the way I always think about solutions, I think what is possible given the capacity of today. And I think what is given the current capacity are very modest things which I'll suggest. This report needs to be an annual report. We need to, from this conversation possibly, hold more conversations. And I'll stop there. That is all the modest solutions I can propose today.
Thank you, Apar. Prakash Singh ji, if you could please respond.
There are three questions which I faced. One was yours, which has been answered by Apar very cogently. But I will only say that the solution is to place a system in place. Have a proper regulatory authority with appropriate oversight mechanisms, and the law should lay down the circumstances under which a person could be placed under surveillance, who will be the competent authority, for what duration, and whether that surveillance can be appealed against, and what use is made of that material. You see, the bill on the subject, which is still work in progress, that has to be a very comprehensive legislation, which should, as I said, strike a balance between the need for privacy, which is a fundamental right, as clarified by the Supreme Court, and the concern for security. We need to strike a balance between the two, and if there is intellectual honesty, that balance can be found. But unfortunately, I found that in all such cases, government finds ways and means to circumvent a situation, and every institution gets heavily loaded in favor of the government. That is what I have seen in the matter of police reforms also. But anyway, these are matters which need to be attempted, and let us hope that people who work on this do with a fair degree of intellectual integrity. Another question was about problems. Chalta hai in police, that this problem, that problem, taking bribe and arbitrary challans, and all kinds of problems. You see, police problems are in not in hundreds but in thousands. But if I were to say generalize, I say there are mainly two approaches which are called for. See, one is in terms of capacity building, and the other is in terms of institutional reforms. Now, institutional reforms are going to be very problematic. Institutional reforms were mandated by the Supreme Court, but the state governments are not prepared to fall in line, and they have found 101 means, as I said, to circumvent the implementation of Supreme Court's directions. If you study the affidavits filed by the state governments, you will get an impression as if they are all in compliance of Supreme Court directions. But if you examine them minutely, you find that in letter and spirit they have violated the directions of the Supreme Court. So that, institutional reforms are going to be problematic, and the struggle for institutional reforms will continue, I do not know for how many more years. But capacity building is a much easier thing. And this is, as I have always said, it's a low-hanging fruit. See, increasing manpower, now women power also, you can say personnel, human resource shortages. What is the difficulty? What is the difficulty? There are about 500,000 vacancies in the police across the country. Filling up you have a whole lot of unemployed manpower who can be sort of recruited, trained, and put on these jobs. So manpower, manpower includes woman power, let me say. Manpower recruitments, that that aspect can be easily taken care of. Then, I mean, we talked of CCTVs, camera installation. See, CCTV camera installation, yes, it must be there. But let me tell you, I mean, we are an IT power. And yet, there are police stations without telephone, without mobile connectivity, without motor vehicles. And they're in remote areas. What do you expect? You see, when I joined service, there were police stations even without lockups. Now, fortunately, we have lockups. There are some police stations without lockups, so what they would do, they would take any window, attach a rope to it, and the other end of the rope was attached to the prisoner's leg. उसी खिड़की में बांध के रखते थे, क्योंकि lockup नहीं है. So all kinds, I mean, this capacity building is, government is trying to improve upon, but there is still a lot of progress to be achieved in terms of forensic laboratories. We are very, very inadequate. And at any given point of time, let me tell you, here also the figures are not being given now. But 5-6 years back, the BPRD reports always gave the number of exhibits which are pending scientific examination. And I remember the last time I read the figures, it was about 160,000 exhibits. At any given point of time, they are lying unattended in the forensic laboratories because I mean, there's so much of area. So we need many more forensic laboratories, we need more transport, we need better communications, we need human resource requirements to be met, technology input. I mean, all these things can be, capacity building is, as I said, it is a work in progress, but still we have a lot to catch up. And this Chalta attitude has to be given up. Unfortunately, in this country, we talk of police reforms only when there is a scandal. Only when something goes seriously wrong in the law and order front that we talk of police reforms. If there is a false encounter in Hyderabad where 3 alleged rapists are killed, then the whole country talks about police reform and why this is not happening. But after that, I mean, we have a strange habit. When there is a crisis, we'll wake up and then again we go to sleep. Now, why should the states not be, I mean, why should the public not build enough pressure to put on the state, pressure on the states to implement the reforms mandated by the Supreme Court? I mean, everybody wants to, I mean, they want to retain their stranglehold. It's monitoring, nobody minds. Supervision, nobody minds. But they want to retain their stranglehold over the police so that they are able to use it as an instrument of, you can say, oppression or instrument to further their political agenda. That's a problem. But as I said, capacity building, that should go on, and police reforms should occupy the minds of the people, and everyone should talk about it and agitate for it, and not once in a while, but it has to be a systematic exercise until government concedes. Last point, but Mr. Paranjoy, frankly, your question, at the end of it you said, what do I do as a citizen? In fact, that is my dilemma also. I have nothing more to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Singh, very quickly.
As briefly as possible.
Professor Sinha, because there were a set of questions for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So a lot of questions we'll discuss over tea, but I'll start from the last question. Big tech and being transnational, I think you answered half of your question, the very fact that we are the biggest market. Why can't we have control over these technologies? Because we are going to consume them. So where is the system where we can do some bartering? Why don't we have that right? Okay, now the larger order, that is the UN, the World Bank, and the ILO, why aren't we holding them accountable? So these are larger questions. Is it impossible? I would say no. Is it difficult? It is very, very difficult. So now we have to choose the difficult path. That's my answer to that. Regarding whether it's budget or whether it's medical access or whether it was our data for COVID vaccine, I have a problem with everything. Now, the reason being that anything that is technological, that means it's taking away your ability to think and to be able to negotiate. So being technology driven, being Western-like, having the largest access digital footprint is not something we need to aspire for. We need to aspire for having the least amount of nutritional deaths, having maximum human rights, etc., etc. So technology is not as neutral a space as we think it to be, because your footprint is based upon what you're looking for, and that is why I keep telling my students or anyone, stop using digital newspapers, start using actual newspapers, because your news items are based upon what you're looking for. You need to understand the length and breadth of everything. Now, regarding the feminist space, I would say white feminist space, yes. Subaltern feminist space, no, because it's not neutral. It's based upon who is coding. And that is what I said, that unless until we start sensitizing the coders, and the coders go through a digitally appropriate understanding of the diverse identities and the diverse needs, internet is never going to be a safe space. And how do you reduce your dependence? If I had that answer, these digital companies would be paying me multi-million dollars. So I'm not in a position to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very rich discussion, and a big thank you to all the panelists here. I think what we have seen is this very strong view from governments, and I'm not just talking about any one government, but certainly governments, and also something that we saw in the Puttasamy case when, when Aadhaar was the subject of litigation. When people were asking for the right to privacy, the government said, well, that is not a fundamental right. And yet, when it comes to people seeking information, the government doesn't shy away from hiding behind the right to privacy and saying information on assets, on liabilities, on many other things can't be provided because there is the right to privacy. So, educational degrees, yes. And I think it does feed the perception that somebody talked about, that it's almost as if citizens in a democracy who are actually supposed to be supreme and are sovereign can't be trusted. But the state can be trusted with all our information. And I think that this discussion today on surveillance has been very informative. And I think we are all waiting, and so without any further ado, I'm going to request Justice Chelameswar to please speak to us and to deliver today's keynote address.
Good evening to everybody. At the outset, I came here only with the understanding that I may have to say something about surveillance. Data collection and data protection are a different aspect of the matter. When we talk about surveillance, the normal understanding is surveillance by the state and its agencies of citizens or a section of the citizens or individuals and their activities. And the report also broadly deals with that. Incidentally, in a gathering like this, allied subjects like data protection, because a lot of private players get into this field. Before I say anything on this, as usual, in these matters, there is a lot of duplicity in this country, particularly among the people belonging to the ruling classes. I don't know how many of you remember today when the Aadhaar scheme was challenged, this whole judgment of Puttaswamy, and the question whether there is a fundamental right of privacy under the Constitution arose in the context of a challenge to the Aadhaar scheme, which was a non-statutory scheme to start with, propounded by the previous political dispensation. The matter was lingering in the court for a few years, and eventually it was heard by a bench of 9 judges, of which I was one of them. At an earlier stage, when the matter was heard by a bench presided over by me, a very vehement submission was made by the then Attorney General, names may not be very relevant, saying that there is no fundamental right to privacy under the Indian Constitution. In support of the submission, an old 1964 judgment of 8 judges, one of those rare cases, normally Supreme Court very rarely sat in the last 75 years in benches of even numbers, barring 2 judges. Rest of them are 5, 7, 9, 13. Highest is the 13 so far, Keshwan. A few cases it so happened, but we are not concerned why it happened in this meeting. It was 8 judges' judgment. A stray sentence in that judgment was picked up, which did say that there is no fundamental right of privacy under the Indian Constitution. A stray sentence quoted out of context, a vehement submission was made. There is no fundamental right. Then the matter got referred to a larger bench. When the decision came, and at that stage, when the argument was going on, a lot of public opinion was sought to be generated by people who had association with the previous political regime which propounded this theory, bitterly opposing the scheme at a later point of time, though they had propounded it originally. Of course, finally when the judgment was delivered, the Supreme Court, by unanimous judgment, 9 judges declared that there is a fundamental right of privacy under the Constitution. Both the political organizations, please check up the papers of that period. Both the political parties and their respective spokespersons claimed that their stand stood vindicated. Both of them said that we supported the citizens' right of privacy. I hope, Apar, I am not wrong in that statement.
Sir, there's a PIB release. There's a Press Information Bureau official release still available which says that the...
Both the parties.
Yes.
Not only one part, both the parties said it. Government claims. Government, not only this government, even people belonging to the previous government also said it. Now, the point is this. Everybody wants to have advantage of the public opinion and ride the crest of popularity. Forget it for the time being. As Ms. Prakash Singh was pointing out, surveillance and data collection existed from times immemorial. Mr. Prakash Singh picked up from Kautilya, quite an ancient thing. Well, if you want a slightly earlier starting point, nowadays it's good also to refer to those things. Take Ramayana. What was that whole episode of Rama sending Sita to exile? It was based on the information gathered by the spies of Rama. So this kind of an activity started from those days. It is nothing new. It's as old as human. It's not only in India, anywhere in the world. Wherever there is an organized state. Now, there are justifications for this. First reason is, human beings are not angels. None of us, barring few great souls like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa or Ramana Maharshi, somebody like that, most 99% of us are personifications of rascality in different degrees. Some are 90% rascal, some are 80%, and some are 2%, or some are 5%. We are not angels. So therefore, there is a need for an organized state. The minute we have an organized state, the state has its own compulsions if it has to run it. If you recollect, when that Bombay incident took place, that Taj Hotel incident, lot of criticism saying that total intelligence failure. People are ready to criticize everything and every time. Yes, if you're talking about intelligence failure, obviously tacitly you're approving intelligence collection is necessary in the country. I think it's a reality. This has always been an aspect of the state administration. Question is not, it is beyond debate. However much all of us shout here, sitting, reason out and propound theories, this activity of collection of data and surveillance by the state. Forget about, today I am not talking about collection of data by private players and the use or abuse of the data I am not going to talk about today. Insofar as the state and its actors are concerned, this activity has existed from times immemorial, ever since an organized state came into existence, and it will continue. And it's going to worsen for the simple reason, I'm a graduate of physics. Of course, I was a very bad student, therefore I got into law. My dear friend Ramaswamy sitting here, he was in chemistry with me, the same batch, way back, half a century back, 1972, we passed out of the Madras Law College. But I still claim that I was a student of physics, though a very bad student. I'm sure some of you would have certainly read this book, titled 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Noah Harari. It came a few years back. He says, it will be difficult for us to imagine how this world is going to be in 2050. It will simply be impossible for us to imagine today. That's what he says. That is the theory. And he says the reasons are two. The rapid progress that is being made in artificial intelligence and biotechnology. These are the two factors which are going to change this world beyond all recognition. And fortunately, I and Ramaswamy will not have to endure that pain because we would have gone by then. But all these youngsters sitting here will have to go through all this. Now, with this kind of state of affairs, progress of technology, this problem of surveillance becomes more and more intense. It is simply possible because all of us will be voluntarily contributing to this data, to this state. Forget about private parties. The minute we have a smartphone in your hand, the minute you operate the computer or pad or something like that, tablet, well, a lot of your information goes onto the net, and afterwards any intelligent man can access it. This is inevitable. The state also has its own reasons to collect data, and it has reasons to keep surveillance on certain classes of individuals or groups, depending upon the situation. Question is, notwithstanding the fact that the Supreme Court the larger bench declared privacy to be a fundamental right, one basic principle of jurisprudence is no right in law is absolute. Every right comes with a corresponding obligation, which imposes limitations on the rights. So is the right of privacy. Now, question is, when the state is collecting for whatever reasons and justifications, is there an amount of transparency in that process? Is the data being collected in a manner which can be examined and assess whether the data is meant really for the welfare of the people? Ultimately, any act of the state is required to be meant for the welfare of the people of the country. Now, whether a particular activity of the state, like surveillance or data collection, is really meant for the welfare of the people, for the security of the nation, welfare of the people in the context of each right has different tests and parameters, national security, decency, morality, depending on the nature of the right, the limitations are there in the Constitution. Now, whether this collection of information or keeping surveillance on individuals or organizations is really meant for the welfare of the country as a whole, the security of the state, honestly, is the question. Such an assessment is only possible if only we have a proper system and a law which regulates the keeping of the surveillance and collection of data regarding individuals by the state. Only then we would be able to make an assessment whether all this exercise is genuinely done for the benefit of the people or just to suit the political needs of people who are for the time being in power there. That is the purpose of asking for a proper system. In fact, one of the speakers was mentioning, when an application is made, I think Apar made this, application is made to the Home Secretary, how many things are there? The answer is, we don't disclose, and later said the information is destroyed. The reason is very obvious. Perhaps in good number of cases, the information is collected not perhaps in the interest of the larger interests of the society, but to suit the political convenience of whoever is good. And it is nothing new to this country. I don't know how many of the younger generation people, they must have read, I don't know whether they have read it or not. People of my generation remember a scandal called Watergate scandal. What is this Watergate scandal about? It's the same thing. President Nixon authorized the surveillance of his opponents and their office, whatever it is. So this is a practice which went on and on in the human history. It will continue to go on. Now, are we, the people of India, in a position to bring the necessary democratic pressure on the governments? And my dear friends, I tell you here, when I talk about government, I don't talk about any political party. Whichever political party is in government, it's only the change in hardware. Software is the same. Everybody follows the same practices. Of late, we hear a lot of complaint about the abuse of governmental agencies, particularly the CBI. And the political party which is shouting hoarse at this misuse of CBI now managed this country for almost 40 years before that. They never bothered to put this CBI on any more stable and statutory and rational basis. Today they find it's the present dispensation is abusing it. Well, it's a matter of opinion. I am not going. But point is, if only we had a rational law dealing with the CBI organization, and when could CBI step in? What are the areas where the CBI could step in? We have a physical fight whether CBI could go into West Bengal or not. Virtually the local police of West Bengal, Mr. Prakash Singh, you remember that incident? The local police of West Bengal and the CBI people clashed. And then matter went to the Supreme Court. There's another story that the Supreme Court didn't decide. That's a different matter. The question is this: can we, as a society, put the democratic pressure on the lawmakers of this country, the parliament or the state legislatures, to rationalize these practices and these institutions? There the question is, the numbers matter. As it was pointed out in this report read out earlier by Mr. Mukul, the opinions on the basis of the statistical data collected seems to be that a lot of people are not really worried about the collection of this kind of a data or surveillance because they don't understand, or it simply doesn't trouble them because they are not being put to surveillance. Nobody needs it. Who are put to surveillance by the state? People who are likely to create political trouble. Now, most of the common men in this country, actually they are the real makers of the political trouble, because ultimately it's their vote which creates all the trouble for any political party. But then they are not taken into consideration. And so long as they don't realize the necessity to rationalize this pattern of information collection by the state, they are not made to understand the importance and relevance of the regulating this authority of the state to collect information. Nothing can be, of course, all these meetings and where people like all of us speak are looked at only as efforts to educate or inform the common man about the necessity to regulate these practices. To that only to that extent these meetings have some purpose. Ultimately it is for the common man. It is the numbers in the electoral process which determine this. And some of these matters like data collection, your right of privacy, ultimately what is right of privacy? We are talking about CCTV cameras, surveillance in public places. Broadly speaking, I am not making an absolute anyway. Today what I say is not a law. Broadly speaking, that is a very, very, very minor aspect of the right of privacy, because right of privacy ultimately is something personal. The minute we enter the public space, we are no more in a private area. Our right of privacy is very limited there. And the need of the state to collect information in that regard, see, all of us are used to, we accept without any question the presence of a policeman on a railway platform. What is the policeman doing there? Keeping surveillance on the events happening there on the railway platform or bus standing or any busy center of Delhi. Policeman keeps a watch. It's become a part of the system maybe for the last 200 years or so on, so we have come to accept it. Now technology is trying to slowly replace that physical supervision or surveillance by the police constable through a CCTV camera. It has very little to do with the right of privacy. Privacy ultimately is your own home. In law, there are three elements which describe privacy: sanctuary, repose, and intimate decision-making process. These are the three elements which constitute the legal right of privacy. Sanctuary means your own home, where you are absolutely free to, subject of course once again there, you can't indulge in activities which are hazardous or nefarious there. But then within the limitations of that legal parameters, an individual is entitled to the greatest degree of freedom within his residence. Similarly, intimate decision-making process is another aspect. What I eat, how I dress up, whom I marry or whom I don't want to interact with. These are all intimate decisions which constitute elements of privacy. These are areas. Now, the minute I go out into the street, what I am doing there in public is certainly open to the public gaze. CCTV camera is something which is installed by the state. Lakhs or thousands of people are watching me when I am going it. If I can't have an objection for that, I can't stop it. It's nature. If I can't have an objection for that, I don't know why should there be any objection for a CCTV camera in a public place. On the other hand, state may have justifications to install those things to ensure. Well, one of the findings is the installation of CCTV cameras did not result in reduced crime. It's not the question, the problem is not with the camera. The problem is how the data was utilized by the investigating agencies. If the investigating agencies did not make a proper use of the data collected through the CCTV cameras, they were not efficient enough to utilize the data, naturally crime rate would not come down. The trouble is not with the camera, but with the utilization of the data collected. So therefore, that is one aspect of the matter. The other thing is purely personal data, and then this tapping of the telephones or and things like that. are installing what do you call this electronic equipment in offices. Some time ago, I remember 2 senior cabinet ministers had a very unseemly quarrel a decade back, complaining that the office was bugged. Obviously, I'm not referring to the names. One is no more, and one is still available. So this kind of an activity, whether these are things which require, first of all, these things are objectionable unless established to be absolutely in the larger public interest. The establishment of such a fact that this activity is required in larger public interest depends upon the existence of verifiable data, recorded material by the persons who are taking the responsibility or who are resorting to this kind of a surveillance. The requirement is to create such a legal regime. Unfortunately, as Apar was mentioning, the old Telegraph Act is being amended. And he mentioned to you, only the title changes, the content doesn't change. I was joking to my friend here. See, this is the progress we have made on the Amrita Mahotsav of Azadi. We have changed the name, but we haven't changed the content. 1875 to 2023. How many years is it, Apar? 150 years roughly?
Sir, I was a good law student, bad math student. Good law student, bad math student, sir.
So I think it is the requirement is more to exert the democratic pressure on the lawmakers to create more rational legal systems to regulate this kind of an activity in this country. I think for the time being, I think I'll stop here. I don't want to go any further into the matter. I congratulate the initiative taken today, and I thank the organizers for giving me this honor of releasing this report. Thank you all. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Justice Chelameswar. That was very, very interesting. I think we have about 10 minutes in which we can take some questions which Justice Chelameswar will request him to respond to. Yes, there are some questions at the back there, 2 questions. Can someone please take the mic there?
Hello, I'm Praveen Raj, a student of Media Governance from Jamia Millia Islamia University, Delhi. My question to Ruchi ma'am, you said there is a surveillance which is being done by the corporations every single time, every single minute. As a media scholar, we were trying to understand, even in our university lectures also, has there been a disaster shift in human behavior, not just from the technological side, but also from the human end, that we are completely exposed to it. We do not want to question anything. And we are very comfortable towards being surveilled every time. Could you just answer me, how do we resolve or how do we change this disastrous behavioral change in a human nature? I'm trying to understand from your point of view.
I'm going to request that the questions be directed at Justice Chelameswar. But yes, thank you. I will ask Professor Sinha to also respond to that. But
hi, my name is Gaurav. I am an advocate practicing in Delhi. I would like to point out to another aspect of the ubiquitousness of CCTVs. What has happened is that since there are CCTVs virtually every corner of the street now, the police has virtually given up on the actual investigating part. For example, recently when I was in Kanyakumari, my friend's mobile phone was snatched. And all that police was doing was just looking at all the CCTVs, and even the CCTVs, as Justice Chelameswar pointed out, that the quality of the CCTV footage and the whole thing was so bad that even when we spotted the person who snatched the camera, we couldn't see the number of the car used, the face of the person. So we were so close and we couldn't get them. Plus, the police was virtually absolutely not interested to do the investigation in the era when there were no CCTVs. They were still doing their job, but now they're virtually refusing to do that and leaving it all to the CCTV cameras, which do not work. Thank you.
Okay, yes, yes.
I have a question for Mr. Chelameswar. I'm a journalist from Assam. This is the question. Hello, yes. Am I audible enough?
Yes.
Right, so this is a question about, I'm trying to understand what is the recourse for citizens and journalists when you have a situation where the state refuses to put itself under any kind of check when the judiciary tries to keep a tab on its activities of surveillance, tech surveillance. For instance, I have in mind the Pegasus case here. Without going into details, my question is, what recourse do citizens and journalists have when the state refuses to answer any questions from the judiciary, from the topmost levels of judiciary, to transparency, even little bit of regulation for its activities, surveillance activities? I think I have made my question clear.
Shall we just take one or two more questions?
Sorry?
Shall we take one or two more questions? Just
Yeah, we'll take one by one.
Okay, fine. Yeah, that's fine.
If I understand your question rightly, because I'm aging, please remember, little difficulty in hearing. Now, if I understand your question rightly, or heard it rightly, what is the recourse a citizen has when the state refuses to respond to the commands of the judiciary, isn't it?
Yes. Is there any legal or public
Well, I have no answer for it. See, anything can work in a system which is created. And if the system itself is failing, there is nothing which you and I can do. Well, people will decide things in whatever way they can.
Is public opinion the only recourse trying to change?
That's right. Public opinion, how does it deal with the situation? One way public opinion can deal with the situation is at the time of the election, if the public are so convinced that the government is wrong, then vote them out. That is the only way it can happen. That is the whole democratic process. You have to create that awareness among the public. That's right.
There was a question from the gentleman
Yes,
there as well,
yes,
if you'd
yes.
like to respond to that.
Where?
He had asked about how the police has given up using its own powers in terms of investigation and left it to the CCTV footage, etc., which is not always of.
I don't completely agree that the police have given up. I suppose even if the data is recorded, some kind of an analysis of the data is required that can only be done by a human agency. Now, if what you mean by saying police are not interested or not doing anything, I don't know what you mean by that. Unless you expect the policeman to follow the old practice of taking the lathi, running after the man, and you know, rest of it I don't want to say. What happens, all of us know that. If that is the only policing we know, well, it's a very primitive way of dealing with things. Take advantage of the technology. It's a much better tool to prevent or even prevent crime or to bring the criminals to justice. So as it is, I don't see any difficulty in the use of those CCTV cameras.
By giving them, I was not saying that they have. I was saying that once they have got even a slight bit of hint that the person looks like this or the bike is so. Because they did not get the number explicitly, they were saying now we cannot do anything. Instead of
No.
further,
See, I don't understand.
See,
Therefore, what you should be asking is nothing to do with the police. We should be asking for more efficient cameras. That's all, isn't it? So, if you believe that the policeman's physical observation is better than CCTV camera, it is maybe true in some cases. but not in every case, because there are limitations on policeman's observation. The CCTV camera, on the other hand, records continuously.
There's a question here and then we'll go.
I would like to add to the question asked by my fellow friend. Do we need additional layer of protection and the safeguard for lawyers and journalists when for lawyers it violates attorney and client relationship when their phones are tapped, when journalists, when they are working, their sensitive information is being intercepted? Do we need separate kind of procedures apart from the citizens, or we need to have the same safeguards to them? Are they equal, or they should be given separate layer of procedures, safeguard?
Well, gentlemen, that's a matter of opinion. Personally, if you ask me that question, why do we require greater protection? No, even if you think that greater protection is required, you must first define what degree of greater protection is, to what extent it's required. Unless you come out clearly with what is that protection you are thinking of, I will not be able to answer your question. See, the protection of a professional, journalist or a lawyer, is also subject to larger public interest, isn't it? Yes.
The last question, because I'm told that we have to wrap up.
So, Justice Chelameswar, in the judgment of Justice Puttaswamy, the Supreme Court laid down a three-pronged test. But when it came to actually testing out that the criteria for right to privacy in the Pegasus case, in the petitions filed in the Supreme Court paid no notice to those petitions. So, do you think there is a need for another authoritative ruling by the Supreme Court?
Another authority?
Do you think there is a need for another authoritative ruling by the Supreme Court listing out the circumstances in which right to privacy would be protected by the state? Because the data protection bill, most people here, I think that the government would be given too much leeway in that bill. So there might not be protection of privacy in that bill. So should the Supreme Court step in again to...
One more judgment, how does it help? If a 9-judge judgment of the Supreme Court did not help you, help you in the sense the citizen, one more judgment, how is it going to help anybody in this country? Question is not number of judgments. Question is one of the commitment to the values of the Constitution. If that is lacking on the part of the various organs of the state, any number of judgments will not improve the situation.
Thank you very much. I think there was a question for Professor
In fact,
Sinha you want.
just I'll add an extra one statement. My friend Ms. Prakash Singh went to the Supreme Court some 14 years back. Your first case was 14 years back. And then Supreme Court laid down the principle as to how to choose the Directors General of Police in various states. The judgment, to my mind, was very clear as to what is to be done. If you read the judgment, it will be clear, at least the lawyer friends know it. Notwithstanding that judgment, in the last 15 years, the guidelines given by Mr. Prakash Singh's case were flouted more number of times than they were followed. What could we do about it? Ultimately, if the organs of the state do not have that respect for the system, nothing can be done.
Can there be no parliament?
Sorry?
Can there be no parliamentary option? Like there are parliamentary...
What is the parliamentary action option? See, parliamentary accountability depends upon the awareness of the people. When people in the parliament vote on party lines, what is the option available there? Yes, in theory, that is the first audit. Parliamentary audit is the first audit of the executive action. But ultimately, what is happening in the party system, that audit fails. They simply vote on the basis of the party diktats. And now it has a constitutional protection, 10th schedule. If you don't vote in accordance with the whip, you lose your membership.
Thank you. Thank you, Justice Chelameswar, for those very insightful responses. I think Professor Sinha is saying that she's going to respond to you over tea because we are told that we are running out of time. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Vipul or Radhika. Yes, Radhika. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, and all of our panelists for that really rich and insightful discussion. And I would like to thank my colleagues at Common Cause and CSDS and the research team, as well as the FGD participants, the police officers who gave us time for the interviews, and all of you who have come here today. Thank you so much. The report is available on the Common Cause and CSDS website. And I would request you all to join us for tea outside.